Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. The convergence of AI and healthcare is reshaping how we approach everything from drug discovery to manufacturing to patient care. One of the driving forces of this transformation is NVIDIA, now a pivotal force in AI infrastructure, with healthcare being a key vertical. NVIDIA's intention is to push the whole field forwards, supercharging healthcare with AI. So I'm pleased to say that I'm joined on today's podcast by Dr. Eva-Maria Hempe, Head of Healthcare Life Sciences for EMEA at NVIDIA. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Before we jump in, please could you just introduce yourself, please, and how you got to be doing what you're doing today, please?
I'm Eva-Maria, as you said. I lead Healthcare and Life Sciences for NVIDIA in Europe. So my role is to shape the business, to lead the business, to figure out where do we go and how do we achieve our goal of really pushing healthcare to the next level with AI and solving some of the really pressing problems we are encountering in that field. My background is a bit of a mix. So I'm originally a physicist. I then did a PhD in the design of healthcare services in the UK. I really found my passion with that, but it turned out that it's a bit of a hard sale if you're like a physicist and my degree was actually in engineering and you want to go into healthcare. So I took a bit of a detour and I worked in consulting for almost 9 years. And then was at a point where like, okay, maybe I want to do a bit more than rather just tell people what they should be doing. So I went into a software company where I did like large strategic projects, and it was a great job. The only thing, it wasn't healthcare. So when the opportunity came to basically be in tech and healthcare and do strategic as well as operational stuff, yeah, it just was a good dream come true.
Great. So let's talk then about NVIDIA's role in healthcare. The company describes itself as a software company that does hardware. It'd be great to understand that a bit more and how this philosophy translates into practical solutions when it comes to transformation of biotech and pharma.
Yeah, so we are indeed a full stack computing company. And the reason for that is that we believe that to really harness the full potential of accelerated computing, and accelerated computing is a word we love to use. It basically means parallelized computing. So in the old world on CPUs, you basically do things sequentially. And what GPU can do, you can do things in parallel. And a lot of things, it actually makes sense to do them in parallel. Like one of the ways I explain it, if you're a bouncer to a club, and you let one person in at a time, it takes a long time. If for somehow you manage to have 2 heads and 4 arms and you can let in 2 people at the same time, the line is going to half and you're going to be a lot faster. So this accelerated computing is sort of a central tenet of what NVIDIA is built around. And to really harness the full power of that and of AI, you need hardware and software which are really playing together as well as they can, which are optimally aligned. And so this is why we basically go full stack all the way from the chips, which is what we're known for, to the actual software packages. We don't build end customer solutions. Like we sometimes show them in our presentations, but it's usually something we build together with a partner because we are a developer platform. So we're working with people who are building AI, who are building great applications, and we like to think of ourselves as the ones who are providing the tools to do that better and faster and easier.
Accelerated computing, the letting lots of people into the nightclub analogy, that was originally on graphics, wasn't it? For the GPUs to make Pixar and, Hollywood movies and stuff like that. How long has NVIDIA been active in healthcare as a key vertical for you?
It goes back quite a long time because of images. So the reason why images work so nicely with parallel computing is because if you imagine a screen, all the pixels are independent of each other, usually. I mean, there is some magic you can do these days that you actually don't have to calculate all the pixels. You can only calculate every 50th pixel, so and infer the rest between. But in theory, the pixels are independent of each other, so you don't have to calculate them one by one, but you can calculate them in parallel. And so there's a bunch of problems in healthcare which are similar. So like one problem, the problem we started with was around, so you have these images of the human body, or nowadays also of a cell, and you need to say what is in there. You need to segment the image. If it's an MRI image, you want to say, this is the heart, this is the spleen, this is the liver. And so we started in healthcare actually with images. And then we branched out from that. And that goes back like really early into the beginnings of the company. It really picked up speed with the release of the transformer architecture. And then just, I think, half a year later or so, we launched what's now called Clara. And so Clara is the software part of what I was saying before. So it's a platform, and it's an umbrella name for several other platforms which are in there. And these platforms are specific to both the challenges and the data we encounter in healthcare. So we have also more general platforms, which you can use for anything from retail to, I don't know, energy, but then there are some which are just for healthcare. And we're solving problems like, how can you make genome analysis more widely accessible by speeding it up from 30 hours to 60 minutes? How can you, as I said before, segment MRI images, or how can you segment cell images, which might be taken in a range of different ways, like bright field, phase contrast, fluorescent? Like, how can you extract information from that? Or how can you train, fine-tune, and deploy large language models where the language is not English or German, but the language is biology? And then last but not least, how can you provide the location of a tumor and of key blood vessels in an augmented reality to a surgeon during surgery? Or how can you show, this is like, if you do a colonoscopy, this is a polyp and this is benign. And all of this are healthcare specific use cases with healthcare specific data. And for all those 4 areas, we created specific platforms. So we created a platform for variant calling, which is Parabricks. We created a platform for the whole image area. So that is Monai, and we have it for 2D for cells, and we have it for 3D, which is for human body images. We have a platform called BioNemo, which is recently went open source for the whole training, deploying, fine-tuning, like the language models of biology. So folding proteins, creating variants on small molecules, and that's BioNemo. And then the last platform, which is a real-time sensing platform for like edge intelligence, and that's called Holoscan. So these are the 4 key platforms underneath the parent platform of Clara, which are healthcare specific. But then, and they all contain like libraries, software development kits, and models that allow the data scientists and the researchers to focus on what's really groundbreaking and differentiating. And so to say, they stand on the shoulders of giants. We're basically resolving a lot of the things that are common to all of them and kind of giving it to them to then use their scarce resources on what matters. And then we have general platforms as well, which also can create real value and create practical solution in healthcare. So one of the examples is Nemo. It's called similar to BioNemo because it's the non-bio version. So it's the normal language models, so natural language. And you can solve problems with that, like how can you enable a nurse to spend more time with the patients instead of filling in paperwork? So one of our partners, Mayo Clinic, they're basically having a push. They want a nurse to not have to touch a keyboard throughout her entire shift. And that all works by using natural language processing. So she can dictate, and it's actually accurate. She can also just it can also just listen in and then summarize what was said and put it automatically into the hospital systems. So all of those things are how the technology can be really used to drive a transformation and to help us get better at healthcare and life sciences.
Thank you for sharing that, very practical, real world use cases. Very interesting to hear those. 2025, it's clear, is going to be a year that's defined by AI. Meta, to take one example, have promised to invest 60 billion in just 1 year. And obviously, NVIDIA is right in the midst of all of this. When DeepSeek came out in China, the share price took an impact. I'd be interested to get your take on why is AI so important right now? Why is now the time? It's been a buzzword for decades. What's happened now?
It was a buzzword for a long time, and now it's becoming real.
Exactly.
The way I like to think about it is what got us to this breakthrough moment is three elements. Like you need data, you need algorithms, and you need compute. And I think with ChatGPT and then spreading out a lot of fields since then, it just all those three things came to maturity at the same time. The interesting thing, if you take this further, it also means for us to keep progressing, we have to also develop those three things in sync. So we have to continue to grow computing capacity. We have to continue to develop better algorithms, and we have to continue to invest in the data. And I know there's also been some discussion about like, are we running out of data? I mean, my personal view is I don't think so. We're running out of a specific kind of data. We're running out of like the big masses, but there's still so much also proprietary data within companies. And not like data is a fascinating topic. Not all of this data is equally valuable. I mean, I sometimes call it like the grandma's attic problem. Like you have your grandma's attic and you think there must be something valuable in there. Like her jewelry must be somewhere up there. And you can spend an enormous amount of time and resources trying to clean up old photographs and broken chair legs and whatever. And you might find something or you might not. So not all data is equally valuable.
Which is often the issue, I think, with data lakes.
Yeah.
When companies say, well, okay, well, the first priority is let's just capture all of this data from all these different sources, chuck it in a data lake, and then hopefully it will sort itself out in a future that maybe never arrives.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be much more intentional. This is actually also something we see. We see quite a lot of companies right now who are really going into data collection, in a very structured way, because again, the data we have often has some inherent limitations. So we have a lot of data on molecules which we can synthesize. What about all the molecules we cannot synthesize? We cannot synthesize easily. We have data on proteins that fold. Like what about the proteins that do not fold so well? So you have to also always be aware of the limitations. And there's companies like Recursion, for example, who do very structured sampling of experiments to get like a better databases. And there's a really interesting thing going on right now where people are almost trying to close the lab in the loop. So the lab in the loop is this idea of you start with data, or you start somewhere, it's a loop. So it's like you start with data, you create a hypothesis, you run an experiment, and you feed that data of the experiment back into your database. And that allows you to refine your hypothesis. So you're going in a circle between wet lab and dry lab. Now, could think about making this sort of agentic. So agentic is like the new buzzword, but also we're getting there to unbuzz it and make it real. So agents basically mean you have perception, you have reasoning, and you have action. So perception in this case is you're either starting with a prompt or you're starting with some sort of data. And then the reasoning is you create a hypothesis. And then the act is you design an experiment. So we're starting, and there was actually just an article yesterday on the BBC where like this one professor was very distraught because he was like, I worked for years coming up with this hypothesis, and then Google gives me this tool and I try it out and gives me within 48 hours 5 hypotheses, and one is the one I've been working on for so long, which isn't published anywhere. Like, how is this happening? So that's why I'm saying we're unbuzzing it. We're getting there. And then the next step would be to actually linking it up to automated labs. And if you think about this really then allows you to create a lot more data than if you have to do everything by hand. You can do a much better sampling. And I think that will be the next step. But like to your initial questions, why are we where we are today is just because we have this lockstep between data, algorithms, and compute, and they all keep developing. Like we keep getting better with the algorithms. We keep making things more efficient. But more efficient doesn't necessarily mean smaller, but it also can mean better. Like you can do more with the same resources, or you put in less resources. So there's a lot of movement there. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see where it goes. And I think we're just getting started. And those three elements will continue to develop in lockstep and will allow us to see things we can't even imagine today.
I love that concept of closing the loop with agentic scientists and automated labs. You can just imagine how fast things would progress when that's in place.
I mean, that's one of the things actually about AI. So one of the mental images I find super insightful when talking about this is just imagine like a line, like a linear curve, and then imagine an exponential curve. And then think about the difference between linear and exponential. So for the longest time, the exponential curve actually traces the zero line, and then suddenly it shoots up. And so the world, a lot of things, and we believe AI also is going to be exponential. A lot of things in the world are exponential, but our brains are wired to think linear. We just can't think exponential, even if we try. And what this leads to, because we think linear in an exponential world, is we're disappointed because like our expectations like this and reality is like flat, 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 flat. So we are disappointed, and our disappointment actually grows. And then suddenly there's a point where it basically just shoots up and things are happening much faster than we would have ever thought possible. And particularly if you go back to Lab in the Loop, this could really lead to an acceleration of knowledge creation. Like getting it to work initially will be a bit of a hard slog, but then once you get it to work, you're just going to have an exponential knowledge and insight creation.
Yeah, like general scientific intelligence, that sort of incredibly rapid, exponential.
Yeah.
Are you seeing signs of that at the moment? I mean, can you see that in any of the customers you're working with, the signs of that exponential growth starting to pick up?
Because I see a lot of the interest in the parts. So we see the interest in agentic ways of doing science. So like to which degree I kind of knew it, but I was really impressed when I first used like a reasoning model, and you basically see how it goes through different ways. Again, it goes back to how models work. So a model is still, it's probability. So it goes down. So every token depends on the previous token. And so if you think about it almost like you're going on a hike, if you take a wrong turn, you have no chance of ever finding back to the right path because you basically keep going down that rabbit hole. And where the reasoning capability of the models helps is because you're testing out more path, and then you're kind of running through it. We call it the second law of scaling. It's inference scaling or reasoning, and he's going through it multiple times. And that way you can avoid going down dead ends and you get better results. But like first time I saw this reasoning in action, it was quite interesting to see how it runs through those things. So people are very interested in applying this to science to basically help them. Like this professor I referred to. I mean, just imagine again how much time he can save and what he can do with his time. I mean, if he had a tool like that, which is able to create his research hypothesis in 2 days instead of years, he's not going to sit there and go on vacation, but he's going to tackle even harder things. So that's a beginning of this exponential uptake. And on the other hand, a lot of people I talk to are very interested in the automated lab. And I mean, automated lab is also interesting. I mean, you could also say, I mean, we've tried that before. We've tried to automate labs. It didn't get us that far, or it was always a bit of a disappointment. I think a part there is I put really high hopes in robots and humanoids, because one of the reasons I think, it's my personal opinion, but why automated labs so far hasn't worked that well is because it was too rigid. So you have all those different instruments, and then the human in the lab is sort of the person which gives you the flexibility. So maybe I do a second run, maybe I try that step next, maybe I basically shake it for a bit. And if you're trying to automate this in like a standard automation, you're just stuck. I mean, the vial has to go somewhere next. You can't reroute it without reconfiguring the whole thing. And if you had a humanoid robot, you would still have the flexibility to some degree of a human, but you could still automate it. I think there's a similarity here. Our CEO Jensen at some point said like he thinks there's going to be like 2 or 3 form factors of robots we'll see, and not because the best form factors per se, but just because our world is built for it. So our world is mostly built for humans and for cars. So, I mean, the human form, the humanoid robot form is not per se the best form. There's probably things that could be more efficient, like the little cutie one in Star Wars. Maybe that's the better form to build robots. But then once you have stairs, you can't go down the stairs. Once you have to grab something from a pie, you can't grab it from a pie, because we build our world for ourselves. We build our labs for ourselves. But yeah, I think the components are there. I see the interest, and I think I see first signs of that we might enter that acceleration. But it's still like we still have to kind of piece it all together.
Are you ever tempted to do it yourself? A lot of biotechs, when they create a platform, they'll also end up creating their own products in the pipeline as well, partly just to show how the technology could be used. I mean, when you're talking about this automated, I appreciate that generally your model at NVIDIA would be finding, best in breed companies to partner with. But what could that look like if you were to sort of actually, create your own automated lab, in part to show how things work, but also as a way to sort of test some of these innovations?
First of all, I think most companies which create platform technologies, they create the asset not so much to show that it's doable, but just because our entire system right now, our entire funding system revolves around the asset. Like if you're doing a platform, you're not going to get funding for a platform, which has its issues, because then if you create an asset and your asset is bought by a company which only has interest in a particular indication, then your platform just goes away and is only used for that one indication. But that's like as a side note. I mean, for NVIDIA, our remit very clearly is this technology enabler, this toolbox, and the toolbox will grow in complexity and in what it can do. And as I said before, we sometimes do things ourselves, we sometimes develop models ourselves, and it is more as a showing the art of the possible. But I think in this area on the automated labs, we have so many great partners who are really interested in taking us forward. But I think what I can answer is the elements we are likely to bring to it are all the work we do on robots. And we're doing some very fascinating stuff there. It's called the 3-computer approach, because you kind of need 3 computers. You need a computer which creates the virtual world to train your robot in. So just just hear me on that one for a moment. So the problem is, if you're trying to teach a robot how to do things in real life, there's a bunch of problems with it. So I have a cup here, and I want to teach my robot how to grab the cup. So I could do this with trial and error, but I would break a lot of cups, and it would take quite a while. But what I could do instead is I could create this cup in a physically accurate digital twin, like a physically accurate virtual world. And then I could teach the robot could try all the different ways of grabbing it in the virtual world. It goes much faster and it breaks less cups. With cups is the thing, it's just a cup. But if you think about if this is teaching a robot how to close a wound, you probably don't want it trying it out for a long time. Or if you want to, or if you want to kind of also run a lab, or if you want to do things in a lab which take quite a lot of precision, it's much easier to sort of train this in a virtual world. So this is the first computer. It creates like the input that goes into training the robot together potentially with some real world video. Then the second computer is really kind of building the model. It's like training the model based on all the input. And then the third computer is the computer which actually controls the robot. It's the inference computer. It's where the model actually runs. I said before, our platform HoloScan, which is exactly about controlling robots, allowing real-time or near real-time, low latency applications. So I think that would probably be the technology we would see on the robotic side. So as I said before, I think if I was building it, I would probably for now start with something where I automate certain things, but it would likely include some sort of humanoid robot. And then, but like I said, I think it's a play where we'll be enabling people with technology and with components.
Absolutely fascinating. You mentioned the NVIDIA Toolbox. It'd be great to understand a bit more about that. There's various different parts of it. There's the Clara platform. You've got the blueprints, which are part of it. And there's been recent announcements like Evo 2, of course. It'd be great to just understand a bit more about this whole tool set and what it gives to biopharma companies.
I'm happy to. at some point before we recorded, you said that biology is the most complex system in the known universe. And so we're really helping to sort of unravel that. And the key thing to understand in this area is BioNeMo. As I said, it's open source, and we provide the tools to train and deploy models. So these can be models either from scratch, or you can actually customize a foundation model. And so that's the one part of BioNeMo framework. Think of it as tools to train and deploy models. The second part is BioNeMo NIMs. So NIMs are NVIDIA Inference Microservices, and these are models where we believe that large part of the digital biology community can benefit from, and we make them easily available and easily usable. So we are basically taking all the dependencies, all the sub-libraries, all the things you need to get sorted for this model to run, and we package them together with the model in a Docker container. It has industry standard APIs. We kind of optimize the heck out of it, so it runs a lot faster than like a native version of it. It's like it knows also what chip it's running on, so it can optimize itself to the particular chip. And if you see the side-by-side comparisons, it's quite fascinating to see how much faster a NIM is than a non-NIM version of the same model. And the models here are either open source community models, or they are models which we develop or we co-develop. And what you just said, Evo, is a great example of something we co-developed. So we, together with the ARC Institute, we released Evo 2. So it's an AI foundation model for biomolecular sciences. It was released in February this year, February 2025. And it's the largest publicly available AI model for genomic data. So
that covers DNA, RNA, and proteins, right?
Exactly. So it was trained on 9 trillion nucleotides.
Did you say trillion?
Yeah, 9 trillion nucleotides.
Okay.
From like 100,000 species across the tree of life. So you can do really interesting things with it to sort of look at the connection between DNA, RNA, and proteins, but also between different species. And it also has a really long, context window, but it can process a really long amount of input data. So it can take up to 1 million tokens. So you can actually analyze quite complex biological systems. You're not sort of limited to something that's fairly small and simple. And so you can really look into the connections between distant parts of an organism's genetic code, or the mechanics of cell function, of gene expression. So yeah, we're very, very excited about this. And like one of the examples was that there were some tests with the BRCA1 gene, which is associated with breast cancer. And Evo 2 could predict with 90% accuracy whether like a previously unrecognized mutation would affect gene function or not. And we took this model, and as I said, we made it available as part of the BioNeMo platform, and we have it available as a NVIDIA Inference microservice. So you can everybody can run it. We democratize access to it. We want to enable researchers worldwide to really leverage this model and really unlock biology.
It sounds like an amazingly powerful resource.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was also a lot of work which went into it. So I think 2,000 NVIDIA H100 GPUs went into training it. I mean, again, 9 trillion nucleotides, that's quite a lot of data. But I think this is one of these examples of showing what's possible and giving everybody a leg up. Like this is the shoulders of giants I mentioned before. Like we're giving the entire community a leg up to do even more amazing things. And as I said, you see the different elements here. You see the data. There's this huge amount of data which went into it. There's a huge amount of compute which went into it. And then also some really sort of smart stuff around algorithms to actually make it work.
How does your blueprints approach work?
So as I said, we have those NIMs, and we have those inference microservices. Like in my mind, I think it's a container. And that's how I think about it. I basically think about it as a box, and my model is in there, and all the stuff I need to run my box is in there. And it's a standard box, and I can have some standard plugs which I plug in on the other side, on each side of the box. And if you have a box like that, another image is a Lego brick. So for me, they are like Duplo bricks. They're like those big bricks and I can build things from it. And that gets us to blueprints. Like blueprints are reference architectures. So we're taking several of those building blocks and we're wiring them together to show what's possible. So again, it shows this hardware software connection. And one example for this wiring it together is like a virtual screening blueprint. So if I want to do virtual screening, what I need first, I need to know how does my target look like. So I have a protein sequence, so I need to fold it. So I use like a NIM for protein folding, so AlphaFold, for example. So now I fold my protein. So next thing is I need to want to have some molecules, which I want to bind to that protein. So I usually start with something. So I might start with a known molecule and I use a NIM, which is a molecule generator. And I say, okay, now here's a molecule I want to get started with. Please create me 10 different variations of this optimized for the following properties. So then I have a protein, a folded protein, and I have some molecules. And now the third part is I take both of those together and I input them into a third NIM, into a third box, which is the docking, so the diff dock. And so then I calculate like which of those molecules, of the 10 molecules I generated, fits best into the pockets of my protein. And with this, I basically put 3 NIMs together and I created a blueprint. And so for us, this is like, as I said before, we don't create end customer ready products, but here we're showing how we've done it. We show all the parts of it. And we then allow people to sort of take this and customize it further.
Push it out to your community.
Exactly.
How do the biotechs and pharma companies typically engage with you? You mentioned you've got like a startup program. There's big pharma companies that also work with you. How does it generally work if someone wanted to get access to all of these different resources?
So we work with everybody. So we work with, as you said, with pharma, we work with startups, and we work also with a lot of other ecosystem partners. So if you're a startup, we have something that's called Inception. So it's a virtual accelerator. So it's a program which gets you benefits around courses, it gets you benefits around access to hardware. It's a whole community as well. We also have a program for different VCs as part of this. So this is this community part. And for Inception, you can just sign up. It's free to join. It's free to be in it. And so we're helping those startups to use our tech in the best possible way. So if there's also, ideally you're a startup which does something with AI, and to become part of this community. And then with some of the startups in this community, we can't work just in healthcare. We have now 4,000 startups in this community. So we don't work equally closely with all of them. But if there's some startups in there where we think it's really interesting, really groundbreaking things they're doing, we often also work quite closely with them, again, to show what's possible and to lift up the entire field. For the larger companies, the way we often work, so there's 2 ways we work. We work very closely with the partners they're using anyway. So with the global system integrators, like the Deloittes and the Accentures of the world, with some of the consulting partners, also with the hyperscalers. So we put a lot of the things we can do for them out through those channels. And then we have a very small number of companies, the so-called lighthouse accounts, we work with really closely. So we have really deep partnerships, but it's a 2-way thing. So, we're investing a lot of our time, a lot of our resources into it. And we do this if we see a company on the other side who's also ready to invest time, social capital, like who really wants to drive a change, who's willing to basically also fight the internal fights to change things, and who's also willing to put some money into this. And what we often see there is a bit of a build it and they will come, or we're trying to centralize also often the compute, because what I see with a lot of customers I work with is it's very distributed. A lot of different units have their own compute. Nobody ever has enough compute, but also nobody really has an overview of what's really going on. So by centralizing this in a central AI platform team, you can actually really create a step up for a company. And we're helping the companies to make it work if we believe they're serious about it. So then we help with the access to the compute, like what's the right infrastructure for them, how they can create something we call an AI factory, where you put like data in and insights comes out on the other side. And this can be on-prem, this can be in the cloud. So because we are neutral, we work with everybody. We work with HPE and Lenovo as much as we work with Azure and AWS. We can kind of give this advice in terms of what is the right infrastructure set up. So access to compute is one thing we can help with, and then also access to talent. So we can help with our internal resources to make things happen. We can tap into some of our research projects as well, if there's things the company is working on, which we're also working on the research side. And we also do a lot of upskilling and really like working with the developers, really making sure they're aware of all the things that are out there and of all the software. And I mean, it's changing so fast. There's so much new things coming up all the time. And then we can also help with operationalizing the setup. And last but not least, it brings us back to the startups. We also have help with matchmaking. So if we have like a company which wants to work on something and we've seen it, one of the startups doing it, then we can also organize matchmaking events. We do introductions. And the education part, the upskilling, there's also some of that is available to serve everybody. So we have what's called the Deep Learning Institute, where we kind of do courses. We have our big fair, our big global developer conference. And there we do some of those educational parts. So there is a lot out there, and the community is also very strong. That's why we invest so much in the community to help us better scale.
So that event you mentioned is the NVIDIA GTC conference?
Yeah, GTC happens in San Jose from May 17th till 21st. It was originally a developer conference, and it still is a developer conference. So I was there last year. There's even a session. Like I was so excited. I'm a scientist by training. I haven't been to a conference with a poster session in a long time. So we have poster sessions, but we also, it's now really has a whole business track as well in terms of what are the business question, how do we drive innovation? How do you, bring AI to life? So it evolved a lot from being a pure developer conference. For the in-person event, for that you need to buy a ticket. I have a 25% discount code, so if anybody's interested, just hook me up on LinkedIn. I can send you my code.
Okay.
But like as you said, if you can't make it in person, you can attend virtually. Virtually is free of charge. You, of course, don't get the same sort of vibe, but you can listen to Jensen. His keynote is always a real highlight. You can listen to the keynote of Kimberly Powell, who's our VP and GM for Healthcare Life Sciences. And then there's a bunch of other really great sessions. So we have one about designing the future, protein engineering, AI, and responsible innovation with Frances Arnold, who got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2018. And the co-founder of Evolutionary Scale, I think. Then we have some sessions with the CTO and the Chief AI Officer of Isomorphic. Michael Bronstein is there, the CEO of Sophia Genetics, the co-founder of Cytoreason, some of the large names in pharma like Pfizer and Roche are there. So it's really interesting. And I can really just encourage everybody. So if you can't make it to San Jose, which is amazing, being there in person, but if you can't make it, look at the virtual part, look at the sessions, listen to a few sessions which interest you, and I think you're not going to regret it.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned there being an internal fight to change things sometimes. Be interested just to know a little bit about what you mean around that. I mean, is that something which you would typically see in a larger company with established ways of doing things? What kind of resistance do you sometimes come up against when you're trying to deploy new technology into an organization? And how do you get around it for anyone who wants to go on that journey?
It's a very natural thing. Like people are worried about change. And this is not specific to AI. This is like just general technological changes create, or not just technological changes, any sort of changes create resistance. So if you're working in a bank and they decide they're going to split things differently, people will not be happy, will be worried about it. It's unknown. Like, what does this mean? Will this be good? How will it be? I know the way I used to work. Now I have to work differently. So it always creates stress, and it always creates resistance. And I think it's really about, and particularly in an area like life sciences, where the timelines are often just really long. I mean, said at the beginning, we are beyond the bus stage. We have real like results we can point to. We can say we can cut preclinic from 5 years to 18 months. We can show that at least the molecules which are in AI enabled in some way, shape, or form seem to be doing better in phase 1 than the standard molecules. But still, until this becomes a drug in market, I mean, the phase is still going to take probably 10 years time. So you have to have a long, I guess it's long time scale. And again, very human nature. It's just something really hard to basically believe that things are going to be better in 10 years time if I change now. And then also the greater good versus the individual good. So I think it's really, I think that's also why it's so important to have AI as a centrally pushed function, to have a central team to really also orchestrate it, to be able to orchestrate to show results fast, to get people excited for the long term. I mean,
where does that sit, that AI team? Does that sit within R&D? Does it sit within technology?
I think it should sit quite high up. It's not just a technology topic, it's a business topic. It's a bit like how we used to be about digitalization. And I think the chief digital officer often had a bit the issue that basically he or she was sort of touching all the departments. It's a little bit like this as well. Like, I mean, AI will affect all the departments. It affects marketing. It affects HR probably. I mean, Jensen at some point said like he expects HR at some point to be an HR for agents. We'll see about this, but like it will change the way also HR works. It changed the way finance works. It changed the way R&D works. So it's a general topic, and it should sit with. I think there is no right or wrong answer. It's more it needs to sit somewhere where it has the prominence, where it has the funding, and where it has the ability to drive changes. I think that's important. So it shouldn't be buried somewhere. And I think, I mean, one example, just a little bit of a different context, but I was talking to some customers about hospitals yesterday, and we was like a bit cheeky. There's like interesting and there's boring use cases for AI. And the interesting ones are the ones you read about, like, oh, AI is going to help diagnose stuff. That's going to find things which the doctors struggle to see. It's going to support the doctors or even going to replace the doctors. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I actually have my own views about it. But these are like the things that people, or like we're going to be able to just take a blood sample and we'll know if you have cancer long before it manifests in any way, other form. So these are the exciting use cases. And then there's the boring use cases, sort of like, okay, how do I make sure I have enough supplies in every operating theater? How do I ensure that the beds are where they were supposed to be? They don't get lost. They're ready when we think most patients will be coming in. And what we discussed is that probably the answer is going to be a portfolio approach, but you might actually start with the boring stuff because that is pain points today. One thing we said was operating room cleaning. Like if the operating theater is not properly clean, you're kind of delaying the whole process. These are usually people who might not understand the language well. It's hard for them to see what did they do right, what did they do wrong. If you can do that technology enabled, you have a massive immediate impact. So it's really about building it as a portfolio between things that create value fast and then also enable you to build both the skills as well as the stamina to basically tackle the stuff which is more exciting, but probably also further out and also more disruptive to people's professional identity. So again, if we stay with the hospital example, one use case I'm very excited about always is ambient scribes. So the doctor is, when you're seeing a doctor, it's not like on the keyboard trying to take notes and like nodding and like, okay, yeah, okay, fine. But it's actually listening to you, has having a real conversation with you, and AI is listening in and the AI is summarizing it. I mean, that's a fantastic use case. We're 10 million healthcare professionals short by 2013, at least, by 2030, or we might be even more than 10 million. And at the same time, like healthcare professionals, the ones we have, spend 1, 2, 3, 4 hours a day in front of their computers. And they became doctors and nurses to help people and not to be like sitting in front of a computer. So if you can take this away from them, everybody wins. And you don't threaten their professional identity because they are not data typists. They are doctors, they are nurses. they are nurse assistants, whatever they are. So I think these are use cases which are easier to do. And then you can build into sort of, okay, now you see this works, this has benefits for you. Would it have benefits for you to also know what's the latest in terms of guidelines? Because they change all the time. It's really hard to stay on top. Okay, maybe that's then something to go into. And so you're kind of easing your way in. And it takes time. I mean, change management is a very real problem. It's a very real discipline. And I think it's going to be core and center to this for sure.
Absolutely fascinating. And it's such a fast moving space, clearly. If we were having this conversation in 3 years' time, say, looking back on the achievements that's happened in the industry as a whole, but also about NVIDIA's role in enabling some of that, what would you like to see if would have happened?
I expect that we'll be able to drive real changes with the way we deal with disease and health, so that doctors can predict, diagnose, and treat in a way we've never seen before, that you catch things a lot earlier. I mean, one of the very old debates in healthcare is also that healthcare or healthcare systems often are sick care systems. Like you have to get sick to then get healthy. We don't do that much about keeping people healthy because we also don't understand it so well. So the idea is that we'll have better insights. We can better identify risk. So we can scan a genome and we can maybe say, okay, this is the interventions you want to do in how you live your day-to-day life to avoid symptoms, to avoid becoming sick. And then if it happens, to really be able to be much more personalized in predicting and finding the right treatment. So you might really have a digital twin of an individual. You might understand. I mean, for me, like cancer is an interesting one because cancer we understand quite well. I mean, we know, for example, that there isn't one breast cancer. There's different breast cancers depending which mutations you have. And if you have the quote unquote right mutation, you actually have a really good chance. There's really effective treatments. But for a lot of other diseases, we're not there yet. Sometimes it's because there's just not as much money went into it than into cancer research. Sometimes it's because it's harder. I talked to an oncologist the other day and she's like, well, I mean, cancer, the advantage is you can cut it out. You can like look at it, what it was. Like there's a lot of other diseases is much harder, but hopefully we get there, that we can really predict on the individual level what works and which treatments will be effective in the end. And then I think we're also going, what I said before, the whole field of physical AI, of robotics will evolve a lot. So we will have a lot more robotic assistants in surgery theater. We're seeing some of that today already. Today it's really more assisting, but I think we get to a point where there's some surgical robots which can do parts of procedures by themselves with a lot more precision than a human could do it. There will be robotic caregivers, both for care, for elderly care. And as we said before, I think the robotic labs are something that's going to be around, that's going to be taking off fairly soon. And then, of course, also all the administrative tasks. So I really hope that we'll be able to, the doctors and nurses back all the time so they can really care about the patients. And in the end, that what all of this leads to is like a healthcare system that's really focused on the patient, on giving the patient the best care, both like as a human being and then also on the physical level. And I think for NVIDIA, we hope, we see ourselves very central to this evolution. So you could think about a GPU and the software as a computational instrument, similar to like a medical instrument. Like we're building this multi-purpose instrument, which then powers all of these different AI applications and powers all of the other downstream instruments. And we can't do this alone. So we're working, as we do, very closely with researchers, with biotechs, with tech bios, with healthcare leaders, with the providers, to really bring this to life. And yeah, so that's what I'm really excited about.
I can feel the excitement as well. Thank you for your time today, and thanks for downloading so much information. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much.
Experience the future of contract manufacturing at CDMO Live 2025. Join us at the World Trade Centre Rotterdam on May the 7th and 8th, 2025 for an exclusive event that brings together the sharpest minds in BioPharma outsourcing. For 2 days filled with market insights, best practices, and partnering. So head to cdmolive.com to download the agenda and to book your ticket.